So, whew. So welcome if you just joined. My name is Ace, and we're going to get started in about a minute. If you have not already checked the chat, feel free to introduce yourself there and use your pronouns as well. My pronouns are he, him. And also, if you live in the district, which is the 43rd LD or not. Hey, Phil. All right, so it's 7:05, so I'm going to get started. So first, I will pass it actually back to Jesse, who is part of the Sherae campaign.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessie. I use they and she pronouns. And like Ace said, I am a member of the Sherae for State campaign, a staffer, and I'm also a member of Sunrise. So this is like the perfect collab. Um, and I'm super excited to be here and have Ace share some of his knowledge on mass timber construction and housing and how all of that intersects with Sherae's platform. And one of my favorite things about the platform is that it is a living document. So it really does come from community input with people like Ace and the whole community coming together to really figure out what they want and what we want for Washington State. It's not about claiming that Sherae knows best or the campaign knows best. It's about like taking the affected people and making legislation and policy with them, not on behalf of them, not for them. So if you are here and you want to learn a little bit more about the campaign, I highly recommend you go to sheraeforstate.com. Sherae is spelled SHERAAE and .com. And there's also a donate tab there. If you're able, it would be amazing if you could donate to the campaign. We are a people-powered campaign, grassroots campaign, and donations from the community mean everything. And unlike traditional campaigns, this money actually does go back into community. It goes into care packages, which have had like coffee and cocoa for people. It's gone into metal straws and Propel packets so people can stay hydrated. Nice. We recently got soup so we could feed the community with Sherae soup and different forms of community care and mutual aid. So this campaign is literally what Sherae stands for in action and all about community. So if you're able, please inventory your privilege and donate. And if you are able to donate to cover what somebody else who may not be able to donate would, that would be amazing because times are really tough and a lot of supporters are not able to financially contribute. So if you're able, go ahead and inventory your privilege when you're doing that. And I'll pass it back to Ace and educate us away.
Great, thank you. And so I think that this presentation and this meeting, let's say, or gathering, I think is a really great example of the campaign as a whole and just the effort that Sherae puts into all the things that they do. So it was something where Sherae approached me and said, hey, we have a lot of concern from people within the 43rd LD that when we talk about mass timber construction, that we're talking about getting rid of trees. And so would you be able to help educate people and really kind of assuage their fears about what is going on and why mass timber is actually good for the environment and a great way of constructing? So that's what this is for. Let's talk timber and trees, me and Sunrise Seattle, and of course the Sherae for State campaign. So Here's me. My name is Ace. Formal name is Andrew Grant Houston. I am the founder and head of design of House Cosmopolitan. It is an architecture and design house that is focused on creating places where people belong. And so, with that, it's about human centered design, it's about focusing and celebrating culture. And so, with the work that we do within the office, it is all about not simply just creating a beautiful building, but creating something that truly embodies the community, gives back to the community, and so it's very much in line with the ideas of the campaign. Aside from being an architect and an urban designer, I'm also a housing activist, and so this is something that's really important to me is making sure that every person is housed. I truly believe that housing is a human right. And of course, I'm a 43rd LD resident, and so I live here in the North Broadway section of Capitol Hill. I'm also a member of Sunrise Movement, and so Sunrise Movement is a grassroots youth-led organization. I I'm 31, and so I'm still technically youth as part of the Sunrise Movement for now. But it's something where I have just been floored by the knowledge, the passion that I see from people who are younger than myself, who have even I would say less time to kind of be able to truly understand and comprehend what is happening to our environment, but that this is something that they have truly lived their entire life, and so that's why it's important for me to be a member of Sunrise Movement and to support it even more. So it's focused on stopping climate change, and of course, at this point, we're now in climate crisis mitigation, and along with that, also centering environmental justice. So making sure that those who are most impacted by climate change and the crisis are the ones who are put first and are ensured that they can come along with us as we embrace ideas like the Green New Deal, GND. All right. So next, who the hell do I think I am? Because I know that there are definitely a lot of people who are going to watch this and say like, okay, well, you're just some young guy who doesn't even know what he's talking about, and why should I listen to somebody like you who just wants to get rid of trees? And that is not the case at all. This is something that's very passionate to me, and I just want to break down who exactly I am. So I have been a Seattle resident since the end of November 2016. So pretty much voted in Texas. Things did not pan out. I found a job opportunity building housing up here in Seattle, and so I moved. Aside from that, I am a born and raised Texan, and so what that means is that this is a no bullshit zone. We are all about honesty, transparency, and so after we get through this presentation, which is going to be pretty quick, I want to just emphasize that it's all about honesty, transparency, and making sure that everyone is on the same level and is really understanding the concepts and why this is important. In addition to that, I went to the University of Texas at Austin. I have both a Bachelor's of Architecture and a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Studies. I've been studying mass timber construction since it was more readily available, I would say, in the US. So since about 2011. So for roughly 9 years, I've had some knowledge of the development of mass timber in the current sense of what it is now. So this is something I've been looking at for quite a while. Along with that, I'm also a registered architect, both in Texas and in the state of Washington. I'm also what's called an NCARB, or the National Council of Architecture Registration Boards certificate holder. And so what that means is that I have the ability to be licensed in any state in the US. Know what I'm doing. And in addition to that, I'm also a certified passive house designer. We're not going to talk about passive house today, even though it is really great for the environment. The way you can think about passive house is it's basically the 50 to 90% of the way that you can get to a net zero building. So maybe we can do that for another time. We can have another great conversation about buildings and sustainability, but not today. And so in terms of my expertise locally, I'm a board member of the Pike Pine Urban Neighborhood Council. And so I'm looking at buildings at least every month, if not every other week, related to the development that's going on here in Seattle. I'm also a public policy board member of AIA Seattle, so that's the American Institute of Architects. It's our club. It's pretty great, but we also have a lot of influence, and we try to use our expertise to help people who don't necessarily have that knowledge or the ability and time to get that knowledge. And of course, I'm a board member of FutureWise, and so that's a big part of what we're talking about today. FutureWise is focused on developing sustainable cities so that we can preserve our natural environment. And so that's the big key about mass timber, is that we're preserving our natural environment. And as we stated before, I organize the Sunrise Movement, but I also organize the Share the Cities, the Capitol Hill Renter Initiative, Transit Riders Union, Sierra Club Seattle, and the Architecture Lobby. And then just for a little Man, sprinkle on top. I speak English, Spanish, Italian, and German to varying degrees. And so this is something where, with that, I really want to speak about perspective and trying to understand perspective. So when we discuss about housing, who is being impacted, how do we reduce harm, how do we look at something from every single angle? And so that's what we're going to be doing today. So what is mass timber? So there's an old way of what mass timber is thought of, and that's basically just like giant pieces of wood. And we're talking like old trees from when pioneers, because indigenous people were a little nicer about this, pioneers would go and chop down just entire swaths of forest. They would take the oldest, the biggest trees and get the biggest pieces of lumber so that they could create these large structures. And so what you're seeing here in the screen is just a number of solid pieces of wood that were literally just carved from a tree and put together. And so by using just joinery, they were able to have something that lasts for a very long time. And so you'll see some of these structures even downtown today. It's mostly in some of our older buildings in the Pioneer Square area. And granted, the outside is brick, but on the inside, most of the structures are typically timber. The new way is what we call a cross-laminated timber. So basically what you are doing is you're taking 2x4s and you are laying them on top of each other. And so you can think of it as if you had one popsicle stick and you tried to bend the popsicle stick, it's gonna break pretty easily. But if you had a bunch of them together and you tried to bend it all at once, it's much harder. And then when you start to cross layer them over, it's even harder to do so. And so you're getting the same effect as if you had those large pieces of tree, those large trees, but it is within a more sustainable way. You're allowed to use like lots of small pieces to be able to create this larger structure. So why cross-laminated timber, CLT, and why now? And just for example, we have this lovely building, Carbon 12 in Portland. This was done actually by a friend of mine, and it is all CLT. So you can see here, it's really visible, very nice grain. And these are all things that we think about as architects. It's like designing and making sure that the natural pieces of the wood are actually able to be seen. And this is the outside of it. So the reason for CLT right now is that we're dealing with a lot of height restrictions when it comes to building more housing and building more space for people. And because of that, we're trying to build taller. But when you build past a certain height, you have to change the type of material that you use. If you're just using plain 2x4s, plywood on its own, you really can go only up to 5 stories. And then because of fire code, you can't go much higher. And along with that, you have to use other pieces of structure in order to ensure that it's fireproof. Because of course, the biggest part of the building code is making sure that buildings don't burn down, or if there is a fire, that people can get out quickly enough. Those are the biggest keys and why we have the building code. So what has now developed is that through use of CLT, we have what's called type 4, which is heavy timber, and there's 3 different kinds. So the smallest one, which is type 4C, can go up to 85 feet high and 9 stories. And so that's essentially what this building, Carbon 12, is. What is great about this is that you don't have to use concrete. And that's one of the biggest things right now when it comes to carbon and our carbon budget. So when we talk about not wanting to increase our carbon emissions, there's also a certain amount of a carbon budget that we basically have between where we are now, which is roughly an increase of 1 degree centigrade in our global warming, and getting to the danger point, which is 2 degrees. Our effort is trying to get to no higher than 1.5 degrees. I'm not sure if we'll get there. We all need to be together, but we're definitely aiming for no higher than 2 degrees. And so we have to think about the way that we're using our carbon. When you build with concrete, which is necessary if you go higher than 5 stories, what you're using is one of the most carbon intensive materials in the world. The production and just the creation of concrete accounts for 8% of all greenhouse gases. And so what that means is that if you were to take all of the airline travel that happens in the world on a normal year, not a COVID year, uh, in a year, that accounts for 1 to as high as 2% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So concrete, just the production of it, accounts for 4 times the amount of greenhouse gas emissions as compared to airlines, all air travel in the entire world. So when you're thinking about why are we switching to something that's less carbon intensive, it's because of things like that. That we recognize that we need to build more housing, we need to build taller, but also that we need to do it in a way that is sustainable, that is not using up our budget quickly as we try and develop our cities. Ooh, excuse me. Let's see. The other thing too about cross-laminated timber, and you can really see it here, is that most of this is done in panels. And so what that means is that you're actually creating a lot of the pieces of a building off-site. And so when you do that, you're able to just bring 3, maybe 4 people on site to actually build an entire floor. When you're building a floor of concrete, that typically takes no less than 1 month. And I mean no less than 1 month. It's usually the cure process, which is where all the moisture is coming out and it's heating up and it's actually switching into the really solid rock steady that it is. That takes no less than 32 days. And so all that time for every single floor adds up. And so when you are able to panelize and to build something offsite, even before you already are trying to dig out your site area, that panel process can be as fast as a week. And so you're talking about a building like this going up in maybe 2 months as opposed to 9 months. And so that time is money saved. So what about the trees? Well, we're not talking about bees, even though bees are really important. We're talking about trees. And so I think the big thing about when we're thinking about trees and how they're a part of cross-laminated timber is that we're talking about very specific types of trees. And so when it comes to trees, the reason that we emphasize the importance of holding our trees in our natural environment is because they are the best way to sequester carbon. So basically trees absorb carbon, carbon dioxide, all the things that we breathe, bring it down, they use it to grow, and then the carbon is stored in them until they die. And so a tree will typically last for hundreds of years. And that's why we want to preserve our natural environment and keep things as much as possible. The flip side of that is that if you use wood as a building material, like CLT, cross-laminated timber, it is also sequestering the carbon. And because you're doing it in a way that is made with cross-laminated timber, you are ensuring that your waste is as minimal as possible because you're doing things like panelization. You are ensuring that you are using the highest technology to make sure that everything is exact so that you only have to cut something once. And so ideally, when a building like that is constructed out of cross-laminated timber, it will last for at least 100 years, ideally, if not anywhere close to 150 years. And so that's the big factor there. Is we're saying we recognize we need to build more housing, but we need to do it in a way that is reducing the harm. It's all about harm reduction over and over again. And so because of that, we want to emphasize something like that where we can keep that carbon sequestered, we can keep it out of the air, but do it in a way that is actually building up our city and providing the housing that we need. The other thing too is that when it comes to the trees that are used, we're using new trees. We're basically growing trees. We're creating spaces for trees to be grown specifically for this process. So we are not touching our natural environment. We want to keep the forests that we have and not touch them at all, but actually turn to some of our more rural lands or suburbs, like those kinds of things, and bring them back into farmland, really focus on growing trees. And in that process, we are sequestering more carbon. We are adding, basically adding to our natural environment, which is a good thing. There are many types of ways that you can sequester carbon. It's not just about trees. But in addition to that, one of the great things about cross-laminated timber is that you don't have to use the highest grade of wood. You can use lots of dead trees. You can use lots of dying trees, anything that is diseased. Because you're paneling it, and it's going to be in a larger system, it doesn't have to be that super top quality grade A tier of tree. And with that, we're taking a lot of things that would have been waste that would have then just been burned up or used for something else, and that carbon released, we're then able to keep that carbon out of the air in a way that is beneficial for everyone. And so that's why we like it. But it's also important that there are some keys to get it right. And the thing I forgot to mention in the bottom right hand corner is if you notice, the number 4 is actually how many slides we have left. So trying to work through this, we only have 4 more slides. Good. So keep to get it right. So the important thing to think about is that in King County, which is the county that the 43rd LD is in, we have a huge working forest. So the entire total forest land is a little over 1 million acres of forest. Half of that is protected by law, which means that it can't be touched at all. It can only be used for very specific things, usually for wildlife preservation or even for us to allow to go hiking, that kind of thing. The other half is for working forests. And so with that, there's a lot of jobs here. There's that connection between the provision of allowing for more mass timber, about having emphasis on using local wood and making sure that we are feeding that back into our economy. So just these numbers are from 2017, and they might not be super clear, but the total wages for 1 year in 2017 was $900 million from our working forest. And the taxes and fees paid from the forest and all the work that was done was $32.5 million. And so that's one county in Washington State. If you think about how many other counties and how many other jobs are coming and related to that forestry work, it's actually a lot of money that is being put into our local economy, into our state, that is all about ensuring that we are properly using our forests the way we should. It's all about forest management and land stewardship. And in addition to that, we also have the other keys to get it right, which is the FSC, which is the Forest Sustainability Certification, or the Forest Stewardship Council, if I remember correctly. I should have written this one down, as well as the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. So what these things are is that they are certifications that ensure that if a tree is taken for any wood product, it is replaced with another tree. And depending on the certification, it takes other things into consideration, like whether or not that those trees are coming from different parts of the state, different parts of the country. It also has certifications to make sure that the tree is the same tree and it's the same quality from the time it's taken until the time that it's actually used for its final product. The FSC certification is also really fantastic in terms of it protects and honors Indigenous rights. That's something that they're very big about. And these are both world certifications. These are done globally. And so for FSC, they're all about honoring the Indigenous rights of land. In addition to that, FSC certification, they prevent conversion of natural forest into plantations. And so that's definitely a big critical thing for us, thinking about making sure that every single piece of forested land is FSC certified as opposed to just SFI certified. So what we can do at a city level, because of course it's not just about Sherae, it's not just about the movement or pushing for things at the state level. There are also things that we can do at our city level to ensure that we can use cross-laminated timber in a way that is thinking about the trees, it's thinking about the environment, that's being very proactive. And so the first one is the tree ordinance, depaving, and rewilding. So with the tree ordinance here, we understand the development has to happen because people are moving here for jobs. Amazon keeps creating more jobs. It's a little crazy. And so with the tree ordinance, we're ensuring that we do not destroy our long-term trees, our trees that have been here for many decades, for hundreds of years, and preserving those. The other thing that's really key as well is depaving. Seattle itself owns the right-of-way in the city, and it accounts for 27% of the total land. So when you think about our parking, our streets, all of our utilities, it is on 27% of the total land. And so if we're able to depave some of that land and turn it back into spaces for trees, turn it back into spaces for other plants, more natural environment, all of those different living organisms are going to pull in more carbon and sequester more carbon just within our own city. And so if we are doing a better job within our local space, then that means that we're able to even mitigate more harm from the trees that are being taken to be used for our housing. And of course, rewilding, that means developing and growing spaces so that things like bees are able to use the entire city to move around, to be able to have more of a living, working city for not just humans, but for everyone. In addition, affordable housing requirements. So when we give money to different partners, different organizations that are creating affordable housing, we can have requirements that say that they must use FSC certified lumber, that they must use cross-laminated timber instead of concrete, those kinds of things in order to ensure that we are being more sustainable. We can put those kinds of requirements on because we have the purse strings. And then lastly, green building incentives. And so this is to really emphasize the idea of embodied carbon, which is not just about the carbon that's in a material or the carbon that is used to process a material. It's also about the carbon that's used to get a material from one place to another. And so if you're getting steel from China, that's going to be really heavy. That's going to take a lot of carbon to get over here. And so if we're able to start requiring buildings to think about exactly how much carbon is going into their use and to focus more on local materials, more local wood, more local cross-laminated timber, then we are able to reduce our footprint even more. And that's the key. And then what we can do at the state level. So I just have this lovely little image, which is the state from the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. And it has a number of different colors here, but basically we have a lot of different ways that we are managing our land here, not just from the state, but there's also private actors, there's tribes, there are national forests. And so what we really want to do is make sure that our land management requirements are the same and consistent for everyone. It is important to honor and recognize the indigenous rights of land. And so that's something that we also want to do is make sure that we are tying in their desires and their wants into all the land that's being stewarded by the state, as well as the land that's being stewarded by the federal government. And so that's the third one that I have here, the federal lands coordination. Hopefully, if you haven't already voted, you have voted for Biden-Harris, so that we are able to have a working Office of the Interior that is making sure our national park system, our national forests are being protected, are not being used for extraction of materials of any kind, because that is something that is so critical, especially to the amount of land in Washington state that is essentially owned by the federal government. And so that need to have that coordination is so important. And then the last bit that I have here is investments in R&D. And so research and development, that is something that can really only be done at the state or at the federal level in terms of providing that money, those resources, in order to get this technology and make sure that we can scale it so that many people can use it. Right now, as far as I know, that there's only one or two CLT factories in Washington state. I know one for sure, which is on the east side in Spokane, owned by Katerra. That is something where they've put close to billions of dollars into that research and development themselves because no one else is doing it. And so for us to say that we want to be able to use this technology, to be able to make our land more sustainable, to build more sustainably, we need to invest ourselves as a state, as a society, to be able to both build more capacity for that material, as well as also educate individuals like myself, architects, developers, construction managers, construction workers, to be able to do this work accurately and correctly, and also bring that cost down. Once everyone understands the system, once we start to get that system working, it's going to be similar to a TV. So once you have that first 4K TV, it's like $4,000. Once more people have them, once they start to work out the kinks, the price drops and drops and drops. And so that's the hope that we have with investing in R&D that way. And so where Sherae comes in, it's about that intersectional policy approach. And I think that really sums up the reason for having this presentation today and really doing this is that we recognize that housing for all is something that is so critical to Washington, and particularly in Seattle and the 43rd. And so, because of that, we want to build in a way that is inclusive of environmental justice, is inclusive of the Green New Deal, and is done in an intersectional way. So, a big part of that as well is another policy platform, which is public banking. When we think about the amount of capital that has to go to build these kinds of projects, when we're able to use something like a public bank, which is ideally a Washington State bank, that money and those dollars stay locally. And so we're then able to reinvest that money back into the community in different ways. We're able to provide, as a public resource, lower cost loans for individuals. And so if someone wants to take that chance and say, hey, I want to be more sustainable, instead of using concrete for the first floor of this development, I actually want to use timber. They're able to take that kind of risk because they're able to borrow money at a lower cost. And so I think that's something that's really key, is that Sherae is thinking about these kinds of solutions in a very intersectional way. And in addition to that, as Jesse stated at the very beginning, Sherae and the team are thinking about this in a way that they can ask individuals like myself, who are policy experts and who are having that lived experience and working in this field, to be able to ask them and say, I'm thinking about doing this. Does that sound right? What is your knowledge, expertise, opinion on this? And so I know, because Sherae came to me and they asked specifically for me to do this presentation, that they're going to do the same thing whenever it comes to those tough votes, whenever it comes to those tough decisions at the state level, that they are going to look back to the community, look back to experts, and really understand and want to incorporate the science behind things, and not simply just say, okay, well, I think this is best because of X, Y, and Z, and just do it themselves. And so that's why I'm a supporter. That's why I'm here talking about it. And now it's time for questions and donations.
Great. So our first question, what does MCT mean for seismically active locations? And are there any issues with safe construction using MCT and LCT or CLT?
Yeah. So for anyone watching this, MCT has to do with modular construction of timber. And so when it comes to seismically active locations, what you're really looking for is your structural engineer to incorporate bits of steel in certain places. And so this is similar to any other steel structure that you've probably seen walking around. Usually you'll see that X brace somewhere that is kind of bringing in that piece to it. And so there are similar pieces to it in terms of some of the integral design of some of those panels. When you do build taller, you also incorporate more steel, something that I didn't really touch on, but is a big part of this. Once you get into the 12 stories and then up to the 18 stories, you can see on the inside that there's much more steel in here. And there's actually a little bit of concrete as well. And I'm not sharing, so you're watching me point to nothing. I'm sorry. um, Once you get into the 12 stories and the 18 stories, you're actually looking at something where you are having a bit more steel, a bit more concrete, and you're actually covering things. And so there definitely are ways of doing it, and it's all about isolation. Like I showed the Carbon 12 project, that's in Portland. And so that's something that needs to just be incorporated. It's like any other wood structure.
Cool. And the next question is, how expensive is CLT compared to regular timber resources and concrete?
Hmm. So in terms of your cost, CLT is something where if you don't need it to build that high, you shouldn't do it, because your typical 2x4 technology is going to do you much better. However, once you get past that point, which is those 5 stories, and most of what we're building is going higher than that, it's a bit of a wash in some ways compared to concrete. It really just depends on where it's coming from. The other thing too to think about is the long-term environment of it. And it's kind of similar to solar panels. in that that first wave of solar panels were very expensive. And so CLT has a bit of a price increase compared to concrete. But that's because concrete is something that everyone uses. It's ubiquitous. You can kind of find it everywhere. Where the savings comes in, and it's not simply just carbon tax, because we can talk about a carbon tax and increasing the actual cost of concrete, is the amount of time and effort that goes into designing it and building it. And so when you're talking about saving months off of a project, that is thousands and thousands of dollars that you're saving simply from using a different material. And so that's where the real like parity comes in. And so the important thing with that is making sure that people are educated, that you're working with the right type of designers, right type construction managers, developers, that kind of thing, so that they truly understand the process and are able to do it accurately. Because like anything, the more you screw up, the more that's going to cost. And so right now there's a bit more of an increase in price, and that I know is also related to the fires. Unfortunately, the price of wood has gone up significantly because so much of it has actually burned down, and that's related to the climate. However, if we're able to replant spaces, not just for our natural forests, but also replant and use that wood and harvest it for things, we're able to then bring that cost down.
That's super helpful. And I feel like that's kind of related to like Green New Deal and everything too, right? Like it's an investment. Um,
Yeah.
it, yep, cool. Great. So the next question is, how are other countries currently using CLT in housing or other buildings?
Much better. If you go look at countries, especially Scandinavian countries, so and Germanic, let's say too, so Germany, Austria, Sweden, Denmark, they are years and years ahead of us. And so because they have been using this technology for a while, they've also truly embraced that that is the material that is readily available for them. Something to also think about, and most people don't know this, is that you actually need high quality sand in order to build concrete, and so not everyone has that. They have been doing this for a while, and because of that, they've been able to drop the price down significantly. Also, you can go on a website like Arc Daily and just search timber or CLT. You're going to get a lot of beautiful buildings. They just have a they're just ahead of us. They're basically just ahead of us. We're hopefully getting there. I want to build and design that kind of work, and so hopefully, if you know anybody who's looking for an architect, they hire me. But we have the precedents basically. There are other people doing this work. We can learn from them. We are able to incorporate this and move quickly in a way that will help us meet our climate goals.
Cool. I feel like I've maybe seen you see like post some pictures of Scandinavian on Twitter.
Probably.
Uh, so next question is there any overlap between how we use and maintain our forest for CLT and how we can better manage and prepare for wildfires? And then we saw them bad this year, and we know they'll get worse with climate changing.
Absolutely. With it 100%. I think one of the biggest keys to that is how I discussed disease trees as well as dead trees. So these are things where they're not absorbing water. It's basically just tinder that's there. And when there is a fire, it's going to go up like that. And so with CLT, we're able to use that lower quality wood and actually take it out and do more land stewardship. The other key thing that I think is really important is to ensure that the state itself is taking a more active role in not just the management of its own forests, but the national forest, as well as having more requirements for private owners as well. I think the most ideal version of this is, of course, public land and public hands. So moving towards more of let's try and purchase some of these plantations that are owned by private entities. Let's actually start to bring that back to the state. Let's have the state really manage that. I think that would be ideally the long-term solution. But for now, yes, if we have more of an emphasis on our land stewardship, our land management when it comes to our forests, and really trying to use every little bit of it, even if it's not the highest quality, for that like really nice plywood 2x4 that you're going to see, then I think that's where CLT comes in. That's where CLT is able to help us push that and make it a little more economically feasible. Of course, we want to do things which are great for the environment because they're important. Also, we're trying to survive in essence, but we're still in a capitalist society, and so using CLT is a way that we can be more economical about the way that we use our forests.
Cool. That's really helpful. Our next question is, what concerns or positives do you see with using abandoned farmland increasing due to collectivism and centralization of agriculture to grow trees intended for mass timber harvesting?
I think that there are positives in terms of the amount of carbon that's able to be sequestered. And so if you're looking at it simply in terms of data, then great, let's go for it. Let's do it. Let's use these farmlands, which were probably heavily oriented to one type of agriculture. Maybe it was just soybeans, maybe it was just hops. Probably not just hops because we love beer, and so it's probably still in use. But let's take that and let's use it in a way that is going to sequester more carbon. Let's actually start to develop a managed forest, and so to incorporate other types of plants and vegetation. And so in that way, seems great. The caveat I will say is around concerns is that when it comes to the way that we want to live in general as a society and to be more sustainable, we also want to encourage local farms and local access to produce. I think that's something that is missed a lot of times when we come to discuss about food access is where exactly that food is coming from. For example, as much as I love Pike Place Market, there are definitely a number of fruits and vegetables that are not native to the area and so are coming in from other places. As much as it is a local institution, you're still talking about a lot of embodied energy and carbon that's being used to bring those fruits and vegetables here. And so if we're looking at complete communities, we also want them to be able to have access to fresh and healthy foods that are being grown within ideally no more than 250 miles. And so when we start to say, okay, let's turn this farmland back into a forest, it needs to be more of a comprehensive look as to what exactly is happening in that community. And let's say within a watershed, the watershed is typically a good way of thinking of the environment and what exactly is needed within that watershed, what is happening within that watershed, and whether or not a just straight up forest is the best option.
Great. So our last question we have right now, and if you have another one, I'm checking all the streams and checking the chat. So if you have one, please just drop it in whatever chat you are in. I know that there is research about using CLT walls to resist seismic forces, so then we can use less steel and concrete. I think that that's really early research. So it might be a while. Oh, I think that's just a note. So it might be a while before we can do that on tall buildings.
Yep. And so that is where we start to talk about that other piece of what we can do at the state level, which is invest in research and development. If we're able to invest more money in that research and development when it comes to, okay, how exactly is a CLT only building at a much taller level going to react to seismic forces, then we are able to then reduce the amount of carbon over time that much more significantly. But because, of course, we live in a place where companies are trying to be profitable, a lot of companies aren't going to be able to drop $1 billion or even just $100 million into that research. And so that's the place where the government needs to step in and say, okay, we have the money because we recognize that this is something important that we need to do. And so hopefully we're able to advocate for that kind of thing, whether it be through Sherae or even other movements like the Washington Can't Wait campaign, which is being done through FutureWise and other avenues similar to that.
Cool. Well, it looks like we ran through all of our questions. And I know we talked a little bit about answering some housing questions. So if you want to speak on that a little bit, since that's a really another huge part on the platform that you're also incredibly knowledgeable about.
Yes. So yeah, anyone who is currently here on the chat, if you want to come off if you want to unmute and just talk to me, if you want to come on video and ask a question, we've got about 10, 15 minutes left, and so I'm here to answer your questions.
Hey, Ace, it's Connor. I just wanted to say thank you so much for the wonderful talk. I've got to bounce here in a second, but I think it's fantastic, and I've really appreciated your Q&A and kind of whole walkthrough. So thank you for that.
You are welcome, and I know you did one yourself recently, and so you're also an inspiration and someone else who is really working in this field. Also, thank you for everyone who is watching, because it's been a while since I've given a presentation, and that definitely went longer than I intended it to. So yeah, thank you very much
You
for
were
being a part
great.
of this
Don't sweat it.
whole conversation. Oh, thank you. Let's see, I see a question from Brandy. Why isn't this more widespread already? So I think that kind of comes down to a lot of the challenges that we have around the environmental movement in general, which is similar to other movements in that not everyone within the movement has the same idea as to what the success looks like. There is definitely this older sense of environmentalism, like environmentalism 1.0, I call it, which is as long as we don't do anything and we preserve everything exactly as it is right now, then we're going to be fine. And that doesn't take into account the amount of damage that has been done already so far, and that we're kind of just racking up more debt in a way, that carbon debt, and the realities of the way that our system is set up, which is a lot of the jobs, a lot of the economic activity are happening in cities that simply don't have the housing for people who are moving there. And so when you talk about environmental movement 2.0, it's about how do we reduce our carbon usage, how do we act from a place of harm reduction, and then how do we also undo the damage that we have done in the past? How do we make up for that? And so I say that around this because for many individuals, the way that we build now is how we built for over 100 years. Like a lot of this is just technology that we've been using for a very long time. And so for those people, they say, well, we've always done it this way. And we have the challenge of kind of waking people up, and this is why we use the term woke, and saying, yes, but just because we have been doing it that way for so long doesn't mean that it isn't bad or that it isn't doing damage. And so when we talk about using concrete, because it's existed for a long time, concrete has existed for thousands of years, we have to then say, okay, well, everything that you know and have been using in the past is kind of gone, and we have to shift to something else now. And so that's where the difficulty in not using it more widespread is, like, we're up against the corner right now, and we're kind of like, okay, well, now we have to go, we have to do this, and so we have to make this 180 in essence. And so that's why it's not more widespread, but why it needs to be as well.
And I just want to echo, you brought up it's a form of harm reduction too. And that is one of the core values of this campaign. And with it being widespread, you know, like that's what happens when we get Sherae into office. That's what happens when we elect true leaders. And that's why this campaign is important. Like the fact that we have you on here, Ace, and we get to talk to you and have an expert in this actually speak for themselves is just really showing that like harm reduction and that mutual aid and that civic engagement that are the values of the campaign. And I wanted to echo what you said earlier about how it all intersects, right? We have the public bank, so then you can afford to do it. And then we have housing for all. And the thought and care has gone into this campaign and this platform. So just echoing again, like if you want to get involved and if you're able to donate, kind of pushing that one last time over here. And also I feel like we should definitely plug you with your Twitter get you post good stuff all the time, all about this.
I try to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't already follow me on Twitter, and my Instagram handle is also the same, but that's definitely much more just like food. It is the Urban Ace. And so that's all together. I talk a lot about Seattle politics because that's definitely what's going on right now, and it's also tied to sustainability. We are really seen as the leader in the U.S., and I say this as having lived in other places. We're seen as that sustainable leader, and so for us, it's critical to actually be leading in the United States and making sure that we are making the effort. Because if we can't do it, then it's not looking great for everyone else. And going back to what Jesse said about harm reduction, I think that's also key to when we talk about housing for all is that we want to make sure that everyone is housed, but at the same token that we are providing enough funding for affordable housing, that we are providing enough subsidies so that we're able to really address the inaffordability of housing for those who are at the lowest levels of our median income. And so that's that 0 to 30% and that 30 to 60%. Because the current systems that we have simply do not have enough funding to be able to drive down the cost that much lower. We simply don't have the money. And the only other way to reduce the cost is really to cut the payments or benefits that people like myself, the designers, the developers, especially the union labor that we use for construction, if we were to say like, well, you just have to take less money so that we can make this less expensive, that isn't necessarily providing us the same harm reduction in the way that the people who are actually building this are able to then afford to live in that, because that definitely happens a lot where you design something and you actually can't afford to live in it. So yeah.
Yeah, for real. The whole thing needs to change. Have you heard of Sherae? Yeah, that's really great. And if you don't mind, I'm going to plug a few events that we have upcoming.
Absolutely.
Especially, we're here talking about environmental, and we're both part of Sunrise. So we do have the canvas tomorrow morning if you are able to. It's outdoor and you don't even have to talk to anybody. We're just dropping off care packages with metal straws, Propel packets, a face mask, and a sticker. So if you want to kind of
stickers.
I know, so many stickers. They're great. If you want to deliver some care packages to our neighbors, we have that at Meridian Park at 11 a.m. tomorrow. And you can find that event info on Sherae for State on Facebook. So the Sherae for State Facebook. Brandy plugged the donation link one more time, just to make sure that we can really reach out to these final people this last week. Sherae's going against the most powerful Dem in Washington as a Seattle People's Party candidate, a party that's actually of the people. So in whatever way you're able to join the fight, join the movement, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, we got about 10 days left, but it is definitely close. And I believe that if we get everyone together, and this is why I'm a part of the campaign and supporting it myself, that we are able to succeed and actually see Sherae in office. And so with that, just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you for watching. And until next